Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another video in this Preaching Advent series. I'm Reverend Jim Keat, the Director of Online Innovation here at Convergence, and I'm excited for this video to talk to the Reverend Emily McGinley, the Senior Pastor at City Church in San Francisco. As of, a couple months ago, you were, Executive Pastor, I think was the title, at Urban Village in Chicago. So you've gone from the Midwest to the West Coast, and now we're going to talk about Advent. Emily, thanks for hanging out on Zoom to talk about all this good stuff.
So glad to be here. Thank you.
So Advent is coming. I don't know if you knew that in the midst of your, recent move you've experienced, but it will come whether you're ready or not. I think right. November 27th this year in 2022 is when it starts. So let's just talk about Advent to start. What is this season and why is it important for the church?
Yeah, I mean, Advent is a way for us, there are kind of a few different levels, I think, the way that I kind of approach and think about Advent. One, obviously, is to tell the story about Jesus's birth and what was happening in the context of the world, and particularly the world into which Jesus was born politically, theologically, and emotionally and spiritually. So that's one piece, is just to kind of make sure that we're hitting those key stories, key seasons in the life of the church and the Christian tradition, right? So that's kind of one piece that's, I think, always going to be true no matter the age that we live in, right? But then there's this other piece, right, that is kind of that piece about bringing the lens of the world that we live in, the anxieties, the hopes, the possibilities, the language that we are speaking in at any given time, to that ancient story in the church. And so Advent, often you hear it as a time of expectant waiting, kind of picking up from the context in which those stories were being written and in which Jesus was born. There's this kind of deep longing for the world to be better than it currently is, this deep sense that, we need God to come and do something within us and among us and around us, and to disrupt, to use a nice little Silicon Valley term, right? To disrupt our norms so that we can catch a glimpse and kind of get a crack, into a different way of being as Christians in the world. And so as I think about Advent in this day and age, particularly in our, post-pandemic time, like, what does it look like for us what does expectant waiting look like when most of us, and City Church is no exception, right? Most of us who are shepherding congregations are coming on Sunday mornings to see a congregation that is maybe half the number of the folks that were in worship at the end of 2019. And so what does it look like to have expectant waiting? Is that expectant waiting, oh, one day we'll get back to those same numbers and things will be just as they were 3 years ago? Or is it sort of allowing this kind of inbreaking to happen in a way that will disrupt our expectations and disrupt our maybe even sense of like entitlement about what church should look like, according to my needs, right, or my experience, but to allow something wholly other to come, and so then what does it look like to prepare ourselves for that? Yeah, right. What kind of work needs to be done within us, and how can those ancient stories sort of give us some guidance in order to do that faithfully?
Okay, so I'm talking with a lot of preachers about Advent for this series, and I had not had anyone frame it like that. I mean, okay, Advent, yes, the framing, but the parallel to the anticipation so many churches are feeling, and the unexpected disruption that we will inevitably face when we're just anticipating going back to the way church used to be. But I think you and I both know you can't ever go back to the way something used to be, because we don't live in that past. We live in the ever-changing present and the future. Well, I like this. I mean, I like all these things we're saying on these calls, but I love that it's not just saying Advent's about anticipation. It's like tapping into what we've all been anticipating. We've all been in this perpetual Advent, and it could be that similar to that story that we are connected to in the Advent series. Like, it wasn't what they expected either. They were expecting something, but their expectations were completely shifted as a result of what ended up happening. All right. This is cool.
And it's like intentionally inverted, right? I mean, that's sort of the paradox of Christianity, that there is strength found in weakness, that, that a mighty king is born in humble circumstances. And so, how like, who are we to think that
Yeah.
our expectations today should be different than that, right? That
Yep.
like, so how do we kind of allow that to guide us
Yep.
and to invite us into a different way of being, maybe
Yeah.
and a more
Mm.
faithful way of being, perhaps in this day and
Mm.
age, particularly.
Which is great, because I think as churches everywhere are just figuring out what will new normals look like, in
Mm-hmm.
this late stage COVID life we're living in now. I mean, this season of Advent could be a good way for pastors to help their congregations ask that question. What will our new normal look like? It might not be what it was in the past. It might not even be what you were expecting, but let's talk about those expectations and what will emerge, what's going to be birthed as a result of this thing we've all been encountering, that this Advent we've all been enduring in so many ways. And all right,
Yeah.
this is good. This is really cool. Are there any Advent things that you just love? Like, are any aspects of the season, traditions, anything that you just do, or anything that you're having City Church do that others can kind of just rub shoulders and get a spark of an idea from?
Well, one of the things that in my family we do, and this is a tradition that we picked up from my brilliant colleague, the Reverend Aaron James Brown, who now actually just recently took on a position with as a senior minister at a church in West Virginia, and she taught the like family ministries, right? To sing a particular song whenever we would light each candle of the week, and then we would sort of take some time to talk about where was a time that you experienced hope this past week, or saw something that was hopeful, or joyful, and that kind of thing. So personally, like at our table, with children who are younger, that opportunity to sing a song, right, and then to ask a question that is simple enough for anyone to be able to engage in some kind of reflection has been really rich for us. And for me, I didn't grow up in a family of faith, and so all of these traditions are ones that I'm able to sort of like enjoy actually for the first time, right? So so I'm really loving that. At City Church, we do a lessons and carols, so very similar to what a lot of folks are up to as well. And so we're blessed to have a children's minister who also was like a school play director professionally for a long time, and like has written plays, and so she's just kind of fabulous in her thinking about things. And so we kind of, I don't know if we're going to land on this, but we had kind of talked about like, oh, what if, some of the older kids read the story, and then the younger kids we did it sort of in a kind of like drunk history kind of setup where they're reading it and then they're just doing the actions while it's being read. And so we'll see if that's what ends up getting stuck or sticking. But that's one thing we're working about. Yeah. This year too, we're as every pastor knows, Christmas Day and New Year's Day are falling on a Sunday, right? Which is like the every 7-year conundrum. But we're just going to do like songs and cider and mulled wine and time together in pajamas on Christmas morning. And then on New Year's Day, we had a bit of debate going back and forth about, well, does it make sense to do a like a traditional worship service? How many people are really going to show up? And so we're going to do a midday brunch for the folks who don't really have anywhere to go, because I think one thing that's really important for us to just remember is that, many of us may have plans for that stretch of time between Christmas Day and New Year's Day, but that actually has the highest suicide rate in the entire year, right? And so one of the things that I was just talking to my staff about was like, we have to do something, because the people who show up are going to be the people who need, they didn't have brunch plans, right? They didn't have somewhere to go. And so, trying to remember that component of the kind of missional and spiritual mantle, right? Of ministry and what it means to be church is important.
That's so not, I mean, it's the every 7-ish year conundrum, but it is so essential. I remember it was a couple cycles ago when this happened. I was working at a church in West Michigan, and we didn't have our typical Sunday morning services on Christmas Day. It was like, it's Christmas on a Sunday. Everyone should just be with their families instead. And at the time I was like, oh, what a cool idea. And now, whatever decade and a half later, I'm like, wait a minute. The people who show up on Sunday, aren't always having this is their family, and you're taking
Right.
away the one connection they had on a day when they're just, it's like, that is
Right.
so necessary and needed,
Yeah.
especially now in the past few years we've been living in, but always for these seasons. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Advent in general, love all of that. Love the ideas. My mind's still blown about where this all started with the parallel to what we've all experienced in the pandemic and new normals in anticipation. That one's gonna ring in my head for a while. But let's talk about the gospel text for the first week of Advent in particular. Matthew chapter 24, verse 36 to 44. What's going on here, and how would you recommend that a preacher approach this particular text?
Yeah, actually, in taking a look at it, I am thinking about actually what I was just saying around the disruption of expectation, and how, maybe we thought we were in a pretty good spot, and then we're suddenly kind of confronted with the realization that, oh, actually, maybe I'm not where I thought I was. And so, in this passage is a whole series of disappearances, disruptions, like people who thought that they were kind of chugging along, and they were maybe chugging along, kind of doing one foot after the other, not really giving too much thought to things. And then suddenly it's like, well, how come that person is gone, right? We were both, working in the fields, and now this one person's gone. And what was the distinction between the two of us? And so what it kind of, to me, when I think about it, is like, what does it mean for us to take on a posture of expectation that God is going to do something among us that is disruptive? And it doesn't necessarily mean that we know exactly what that disruption is going to look like, right? So it's not really about, okay, I'm preparing very specifically for a flood or a tornado, or some other thing, but it's really kind of more about, how do I develop within myself a kind of faithful nimbleness and faithfully adaptive spirit that is ready to meet whatever moment God is bringing to me, which is less about having all of the right, specific specialized tools, as much as sort of a posture of behavior, right? I always think about the improv rule of yes and, right? Of sort of being willing to sort of accept from your improv partner, like whatever they offer you as a gift, and then adding to that gift and giving it back to them, right? In whatever scene that you're in. Well, what would it look like if we, took on that yes and posture with God, and we really cultivated that within ourselves, so that whatever circumstances we find ourselves facing, we can kind of receive that gift, add to it, and give it back or pass it on, depending on, what kind of theological message you're actually trying to go for. But there's something very ominous about this passage, right? Like, know the day or the hour.
Know the hour.
Yeah. Right. You might be the one left behind, maybe not. But I also think, like, so then what does it mean for us to be ready for that? Not because we know what's going to happen, but because we have a certain sort of capacity for spiritual adaptiveness to meet whatever moment that God deems suitable for us at that time.
That's a fitting place to start for the first week in the first season of the liturgical year. I just, and I hope that at least one pastor, if not more, preach a sermon on that Sunday and they call it yes and. That would just be, I think, a great starting point for framing the season of Advent, for framing this particular text, and so much of what it means to enter into these unfolding seasons ahead of us. I like that. I really like that. Oh, well, Advent is coming, whether we're ready or not. It'll be here before we know it.
Be prepared.
Be prepared. You make all sorts of Advent jokes, like, keep watch, Advent is arriving, But Emily, thank you so much for just spending a bit of time sharing some thoughts, ideas, insights about Advent in this particular passage. I know it's going to be a rich season for all of us, and hope this conversation adds to some of that richness for many of us as well. So thanks again for hanging out and everything you have to share.
Thanks so much.